And so I'm now my pleasure to introduce to you Chris Strub, who's the director of the Wildlife Clinic at the Schuylkill Center. He's our director of wildlife rehabilitation. Chris has been on the staff for more than 2 years now, and we've really appreciated his extraordinary service. Came to us from the Wild Bird Center in New York City. So birds are one of his passions. So I'm so thrilled that Chris has agreed to spend some time with us this evening, sharing with us the stories of raptors, hawks, and owls that come to us, hawks and eagles that come to us at the rehab center at the Schuylkill Center. Chris, how are you?
There we go. Got
There
myself
we go.
unmuted. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I love talking about birds, and I especially love talking about raptors. So I'm so glad that you're all here. Let me see. Let me get my. Let's see if I can make this work. There we go. Oops. Nope. There. All right. Hopefully everybody can see the slideshow. All right. There we go. All right. So raptors are really pretty stunning birds. I think they're kind of showstoppers anytime we get them in the clinic. Everyone's always very excited to check them out, and seeing them in the wild as well. And winter is actually a really big season for raptors. In wildlife rehabilitation in general, clinics tend to see more raptors overall in the winter. And that's because we actually have, one, a lot of migratory species that are only present in wintertime in our region, in the Philadelphia area. So there are a lot of raptors who are not used to being in this area year round, who may not be used to some of the dangers that are present here. And we also have a lot of yearlings who are dispersing from being born in the summer, who don't really know what they're doing yet, who may be getting into trouble, may not be able to find enough food. So those are the reasons we see a lot more of them come through wildlife rehabilitation in the wintertime. And one of those that we received at the clinic recently is a juvenile red-tailed hawk, who was in really bad shape when he arrived with us in mid-December. He was really, really down and out, as a lot of these young birds are when they come into us. We'll talk about him specifically a little bit later. He's on track for release. So, we were a little delayed by the snowstorm and getting him back out there. But we don't think there'll be any problem with him being really successful once he's released. But watching his recovery, and it's been pretty slow, received in mid-December and now we're in February, and he has yet to leave our premises. But watching him recover and regain his strength really has me thinking about all of the really spectacular raptor species who live in and around Philadelphia. And a lot of them are actually startlingly well adapted to urban life. I think we don't often think of raptors as being particularly well adapted to living in cities. We're much more likely to think of birds like pigeons and starlings. But a lot of them really are. So I wanted to share a couple of these specific species with you and how you might look out for them. So we'll go ahead and get started, speaking of red-tailed hawks, with my personal favorite raptor, which is the red-tailed hawk. My family actually used to tease me when I was little, because as a kid I would think that every large soaring bird that I saw was a red-tailed hawk. Now I know a little bit better. Most of them were probably vultures. I know what to look out for, but it really left a lasting impression pretty early on. And I think that might be why I'm so fascinated with raptors today. Learning to recognize that kind of species early on, I think, really stuck with me. So red-tailed hawks, they're a good species to learn how to identify, early on in your birding career, because they're pretty ubiquitous in urban environments. If you see a hawk in Philadelphia, it's probably a red-tailed hawk, more than likely. They're not only ubiquitous, but they're a lot easier to spot than some of our other common species. And they actually range across almost all of North and Central America, except for the very northern parts of Canada and the southernmost tip of Central America. So anywhere you go in the continental US, you're going to see red-tailed hawks. Here in our area, they're resident, which means that they hang around all year round. So they'll nest here, they'll raise their young here, and then they'll stick in this area throughout the winter, and then back again to breeding season. They nest all over the place in Philly. So they nest in parks, they nest in more suburban areas, and they also nest like right in cities. There's actually a pair that's been nesting at the Franklin Institute for several years. So that's a really good spot for them, even though, that's a really urban area. There's a lot of traffic down there, but those hawks really like that building ledge. And so they've stuck around. In undisturbed habitat, they tend to nest on bluffs and cliffs, so building ledges are really a good substitute for them. One of the reasons they're so common in urban landscapes is because of how incredibly adaptable they are. A lot of hawks, and we'll talk about a couple of them a little bit later, but a lot of hawks have very specialized hunting styles. So they want to prey on very specific creatures. As far as carnivorous animals go, red-tailed hawks, they do eat purely meat. They're not omnivorous in any sense, but they'll eat pretty much anything that they can catch, whether that's mammals or birds or reptiles. If they can get it, they will eat it. So they can find food pretty much anywhere. And you can see, actually, if you look at this photo right here, you can see their talons are huge relative to the rest of the bird. So they have a lot of power, and that gives them the ability to hang on to any particular prey item that they're trying to hunt. In our area, squirrels are a very common prey item, as well as pigeons, and we have tons of them. So they have no problem finding food year round. Those animals are out and about all year round. So, it's not like their prey species are going into hibernation or something like that. The typical way that they'll look for food, and this is often how you'll see them, is to perch on a very high up branch or telephone pole or light post, often in urban areas, and scan for prey. And then once they see something, they'll go after it. So actually, if you're driving on the freeway and you're in the passenger seat, definitely not in the driver's seat, scanning for birds. But if you're on the freeway and you're not driving, just scan the light posts as you go by them on the freeway, because especially at this time of year, you'll see a ton of red-tailed hawks just hanging out over these really large roadways, and they are completely unbothered by the traffic noise going on beneath them. They don't care. They're doing their thing. They're looking out for their food source. And at the clinic, we actually don't get a ton of hit by car red tails. It does happen, of course. It's a pretty difficult thing for them to recover from, but we don't see a lot of them. So there must be something in them that's a little bit more adapted to deal with traffic. They're a little bit better at traffic safety than some of the other animals we see that might be having that injury a little bit more often. They can also take prey out of the sky. I've actually seen them grab pigeons mid-flight, and pigeons are really agile flyers. So especially for a hawk that's maybe not as agile as some of the other raptors we're going to talk about, that is pretty impressive. Adult red-tailed hawks, if we're talking about birding and wanting to look out for them, luckily red tails are super easy to spot. Like I said, they'll often be perched pretty conspicuously. And in flight, the red tail is a dead giveaway. It's really, really conspicuous. There are no other birds in our area that are going to have that specific kind of coloration. So you'll be looking for a fairly large soaring bird with relatively long wings. They have a pale underside and that red tail, which you can see, even though it's a little bit more pale on the underside, the sun shining through it makes it pretty evident that it's that color. When they're perched, they have a stocky outline, and they have a dark brown back and a white belly. And you can actually see this band of brown feathers down here on the abdomen. That's what you're looking for. So if you see one perching from the front, that's a pretty clear sign. There's no way to mistake them for vultures if you know what you're looking for, which I wish 10-year-old me had thought about, because vultures are going to be dark and hawks are going to be light underneath. If you're talking about juveniles, good luck. Most juvenile hawks have exactly the same coloration. So it's all down to size, unless you get really close up on them. And then there are some very minor differences that you can look for in coloration. But generally, it's going to be the size that's going to distinguish the juveniles. So this extremely sad looking fellow over here came into us in 2018. So he was a little while ago. He was another winter time guy who came in and was just not in great shape. He was a window strike, means he hit a window and suffered a concussion, and he recovered perfectly well and was released, I think early 2019. But this photo is just great to show that the color difference between the adult and the juvenile. You can see the adult has that really striking red tail, very, very clear, and a little bit more of a reddish coloration overall. And then this juvenile here has that stripy tail. So, so it's pretty clear to tell the adults from the juveniles, you know, if you know what you're looking for. So at the risk of this entire talk being about red-tailed hawks and how great they are, there are plenty of other really, really fantastic raptors living in Philly. And the next one that we're going to talk about is the complete opposite in personality from red-tailed hawks. I gave it away. It's Cooper's hawks. That's the next one. So red-tailed hawks, when we get them in for rehab, of course, any raptor is dangerous. And, you know, we have a lot of special protocols for handling them to make sure that nobody gets hurt, us or the raptors. But when you're dealing with a red-tailed hawk, they tend to be a lot more predictable. I think of them as extremely sharp puppies, because you'll go into their enclosure to get a hold of them for medication or whatever they need.
I'm going to turn this off because it isn't what I thought it would be. Well, it just shows pictures. He's only shown one bird so far, and he just tells you a lot about it. And I feel like it's repetition of that one I saw last year. So,
hey,
so
we can hear you.
To mute mute themselves there. There we go. I think we're fine now. So they'll give you this look where they just kind of look, you know, sad about it, and you can get a hold of them pretty easily. Meanwhile, Cooper's hawks, they just want to murder you at any opportunity that they have. They're half the size of red-tailed hawks, but they have twice the attitude. And that's actually a really helpful diagnostic tool for us at the clinic. If they're not jumping at your face feet first, then they are probably feeling pretty awful, and we need to get to the bottom of it. Cooper's hawks are a little bit more shy than red-tailed hawks. They're a little bit harder to spot, and that comes down to their hunting style is a bit different from the red-tail. They're still very common in Philadelphia, so definitely look out for these guys. They're around year-round as well. And their hunting style does lend itself pretty well to more urban landscapes. So they're primarily bird eaters. And if you're looking at any given hawk, whether you're looking at photos of one or you see one perched and you want to know what it eats, take a look at their feet. So the Cooper's hawk, we can see, has these long, almost delicate looking feet for a raptor, long legs, long toes, very long talons. And that is because their hunting style is to snatch birds out of the air. So they need these really long, really fast feet to be able to grab onto prey items in the air. Whereas the red-tailed hawk, we'll just take a look again at those feet. They're much larger, more for, you know, holding on to prey and grabbing prey items on the ground. So Cooper's hawks are very agile. They're ambush predators, actually. Again, I think that's something you don't really think of birds as being necessarily ambush predators, the way a lion, you know, jumps out of the grass. But Cooper's hawks will actually do that. They jump from tree cover to grab birds that are unawares. So they'll actually stalk their prey from branch to branch. So they may spot a prey item in an open area, and then they'll just sort of creep through the nearby cover until they think they have a good angle on it, and then dart right out and grab them. They have relatively short wings. So again, we'll just kind of flip back and forth between these guys and the red tails. So notice these guys have these kind of short, blunt wings, and then the red tail is a little bit longer, more adapted for soaring. So typically with Cooper's hawks, you're not going to see them soaring up above you the way that you will with some of these other species, but it makes them incredibly maneuverable. And so that means that they can take advantage of really small patches of green space. So, you know, small parks, margins of trees, and they can also maneuver around buildings. So this, again, it makes them extremely well adapted to more urban environments, you know, like we have here. They also have year-round food supply with sparrows and starlings who are around all the time, and they're not above eating mice. So even though they're primarily bird eaters, they're a little bit more willing to go after small mammals as well. They are resident here in Philly, but they are migratory in the northern parts of their range. When I worked in New York City, I actually thought that the juvenile coloration was the adult coloration, because we never saw adult Cooper's hawks. They just weren't around as much, or maybe they just weren't getting into trouble as much in New York City. And then the first time I saw an adult Cooper's hawk, I did not know what kind of bird it was. So I had to check my bird guide real quick and figure that out. But they're pretty distinctive once you know what you're looking for. They've got the slate blue backs with reddish brown speckled bellies, like you can see in these photos, and a long stripy tail. And the way to spot them is during a hunt, when they're chasing birds. That's when you're most likely to see them. So if you see starlings or pigeons and they look like they're trying to escape something, take a closer look at those birds, because one of them might actually be a Cooper's hawk that's harassing them, or another predator. The juveniles, again, it's the exact same coloration as red-tailed hawks. The main way to distinguish them is just size and shape. So you can see in the one photo here, that coloration really well, the brown striping. And then this is one of our patients from 2019. And here you can see those long legs, long toes, and this extremely upset expression where he does not want us anywhere near him. And that's Cooper's hawks for you. They're angry little guys. There's another hawk in our area that looks almost identical to the Cooper's hawk, except in size, and that's the sharp-shinned hawk. So these guys are really cool. They are only in the area in the wintertime. They reside year-round in other parts of Pennsylvania, but in Philly, for the most part, you're only going to see these guys in the winter. And so this one photo on the left here, this is actually a sharp-shinned hawk who came in mid-December 2020 and was recently released just a couple of weeks ago. And this is an adult. He's got that red belly, also an adult in this photo here. And they really are exactly the same color as Cooper's hawks, both adult and juvenile. They're about the size of a pigeon, but they weigh a lot less. They're kind of lean and mean. They prefer dense forests, so a little bit less common in really urban areas. But during the winter, they're a lot more adaptable and a lot more willing to go out of their comfort zone and be seen in city environments. As with the Cooper's hawk, you're looking for a small, fast-flying bird that's probably chasing after small songbirds like sparrows and starlings. And you can see he has the same thing, those long legs, long toes, really well adapted for grabbing birds. And these guys are actually really picky eaters. I mentioned that the Cooper's hawks will sometimes take mammals as prey, but sharpshins, at least when they're in a rehabilitation setting with us, they really don't want to eat mammals. So we have to keep a supply of chicks for them to eat. Sounds sad, but getting animals to eat in rehabilitation on their own is huge, because it's a lot less stressful if you don't have to hand feed them, especially with raptors. And we have to have those bird prey items for them because they just don't recognize mice a lot of the time. So if you offer them mice, which a lot of the other raptors will eat, they just won't go for it. But as soon as you offer them a bird, it's like something clicks and they realize, okay, I'm being offered food. And then if you need to, you can sort of gradually wean them onto mammals if there's a particular reason you need to give them something like mice. Once they realize what's going on, they're a little bit more willing to take other food. So another, I think, really surprising urban champion is the Peregrine Falcon. Peregrine falcons are a real conservation success story. Because of the pesticide DDT, in the 60s and 70s, they were basically exterminated east of the Mississippi. So there were no peregrine falcons in this area at all. In fact, the eastern subspecies of peregrine falcon, the one that used to live in this area, is considered extinct because with reintroduction efforts, they had to use other subspecies. There were just not even enough of the eastern subspecies to attempt a reintroduction. So the peregrines that we have now are descended from subspecies from other areas of the US and also Europe and other places that peregrines are native. DDT is persistent in the environment and it concentrates up the food chain. So a lot of raptors were really heavily impacted. But peregrines really stand out as just being really devastated by that pesticide. DDT would actually weaken the eggshells of their eggs, and so they just wouldn't be able to have a successful clutch and would not be able to raise babies. But thankfully, DDT has been banned in the US since the 70s. So we don't have it in the environment except where it's still persistent. We don't have any new sources, which is helpful. And peregrine reintroduction efforts were a huge success. Peregrines take really readily to urban landscapes and have a number of well-established nests in Philly, including right in Manayunk on the steeple of St. John the Divine. And that actually must be a really prime spot for them because the female of that pair actually lost her mate in 2019 to an unfortunate accident, but she hung around. She stayed there, she advertised her presence, and sure enough, another male peregrine came down. They made a pair. And she actually had to run off of another male that attempted to come and kind of kick the new guy out. But she stuck with her new guy. And as far as I know, they had a successful clutch last year, and I'm sure they will again this year. They have a lot of loyalty to their nesting spots. So if they really like a place, you'll see them there year after year after year. And they're really, really successful. I believe the young from the pair at St. John has been seen like all over this region. Down in Baltimore, I know a wildlife clinic got one of their offspring down near Baltimore. So they're a really successful pair. They really like bridges, tall buildings, church steeples, obviously. They nest on all the major bridges along the Delaware and the Schuylkill River. Same thing in New York. They nest all along the bridges there as well. Those are really good spots for them. Like the red tails, their natural nesting environment are cliffs and bluffs. So bridges and building ledges are a good substitute for them. One of the reasons for their success, and honestly their successful expansion back along the East Coast, is a bird that a lot of people would consider a nuisance and also happens to be one of my favorite birds, and that's the humble pigeon. Pigeons are a favorite food of peregrine falcons. Where there are pigeons, the falcons and the pigeons are kind of in this arms race where the pigeons are getting more and more agile to try and evade the peregrines, and the peregrines are getting better and better at catching pigeons. So it's a really fascinating predator-prey relationship. Even though pigeons are introduced, they still make up a really, really important part of the food chain for these guys. So that's been really helpful for them. Peregrines are hard to spot. When they hunt, they tend to soar really high in the sky, really hard to see, and then they dive on their prey. So they're aerial ambushers. Where the Cooper's hawk ambushes from the trees, the peregrine ambushes from the sky. And they can stoop in a dive up to 365 miles per hour, which makes them the fastest living animal. The fastest animal that we know of is the peregrine falcon. They ambush prey from the air and strike them literally before they knew what happened. So they're really, really powerful and really excellent hunters. You can see the size of the feet on this guy. So if they're coming at you anything close to 300 miles an hour and they hit you with those feet, that's it. You are their lunch. So they're pretty cool. When you're looking for them, either check out a known nesting site and see if you can spot them around that area from binoculars. Or again, you're looking for a bird that's soaring way high up in the sky and then taking a dive at a prey animal that is probably flying in the air. And I can't talk about Philly area raptors and not talk about bald eagles. I had no idea they were here until I moved here. And then I found out that bald eagles actually live in every US state except for Hawaii, which is amazing. I can't even picture a bald eagle in Arizona, but they do, they live there. And in our area, Philadelphia specifically is kind of right at the nexus of their breeding, wintering, and migratory routes. So we have the opportunity to see them basically year round, especially with climate change shifting things around. You know, it's always a good time to look for eagles. And this photo right here that we have is of the pair that is nesting at John Hines Wildlife Refuge, which it's kind of surprising that they nest there, because normally eagles won't nest anywhere remotely close to human activity, and here they are nesting right by the airport. So they must really, really like that spot. They've been pretty loyal to it. They've raised a lot of successful babies right at that nest. So it's a good spot for them, and we're really lucky to have a nesting pair right there. I know there's an eagle cam every year of that nest, so definitely look for that when the breeding season happens. We think of bald eagles as primarily fish eaters, and they are specialized for that. So they do like to hang around large bodies of water with large fish that they can go after, but they're a little bit more generalized than other fish-eating birds. Like ospreys, 90% of their diet is fish. Bald eagles are much more willing to scavenge carcasses and hunt mammals, and also waterfowl. The waterfowl make up an important part of their diet in a lot of places. So as with all of the other urban champion raptors we've talked about, food really is key. If they can eat well and they can deal with human noise and habitat loss, they can live in cities. And they really are learning to live with us. So, you know, the more adaptable they are, the better they are at doing that. The Delaware and Schuylkill rivers are great resources for bald eagles. So Philly really does have kind of the perfect habitat, other than all the giant buildings we have around. But as far as our water sources go, it's really good for them. And we have seen them at the Schuylkill Center. I know we've had flybys, and I know they've been spotted around the area. So definitely keep an eye out. I have not been lucky enough to see a bald eagle here yet, but I am keeping my eye out. One of these days I will see one, and hopefully it won't be because it's coming into the clinic for treatment. Hopefully it's just a wild eagle doing its thing. But you know, if we do get one that's in trouble, we'll do our best to help it out. So as far as spotting bald eagles, they're totally unmistakable. They have a white head and a white tail. Nothing else looks like that. If you see a large bird and it's got a white head and a white tail, it's a bald eagle. And congratulations, you just saw a bald eagle, which is pretty cool. The juveniles are a little bit trickier. They're all dark, but unlike vultures, they have mostly black wings with white on the leading edge of the wing. There's a little white band on the underside on the front of the wing. Vultures, which would have a similar coloration, are going to have white either at the tips of the wings or on the trailing edge. So that's kind of what you're looking for as far as coloration goes. So with all these raptors, we've talked about how they're adapted for urban life. So if they're so well adapted for urban life, then why are they coming into the clinic? Why do we see these raptors in the winter? And the reason is that even with all of these adaptations to living with us, they are still vulnerable to human-caused injury and illness. You know, they're still having trouble, even if they're managing to get along with us. Just because they've learned to live with us doesn't mean that we're not causing them harm with some of our activities. So in most cases, raptors in the wintertime show up after hitting a window or being struck by a car. Those are the really primary causes that they're going to wind up at our door. Window strikes are common for all birds. They just can't recognize glass as a solid surface. We get a ton of window strike songbirds, especially during migration season. It's really unfortunate. But with raptors, usually there's something else going on with them that's going to cause them to have these window strikes. With small birds, they can look at a fairly small piece of glass and think that they can get through it. But imagine a red-tailed hawk. They're not going to necessarily think they can get through your dining room window the way that a robin would. So when they strike glass, usually there's another cause that's making them a little bit less agile in the air. So we always look out for not only what's obvious, fractures, head trauma, bleeding, things that might be caused by hitting a window, but we're also going to look for underlying issues because we don't want to treat them for head trauma successfully and then try and release them and they've got some other problem going on. We want to make sure that when they get released, they're in prime condition to go out and be successful and hopefully not run into whatever caused them to come into the clinic in the first place. So the two biggest underlying causes, I would say, for animals coming in and having that window strike injury are rat poison and lead poison. So rat poison is a really tough one. It's hard for them to recover from. As with DDT that we talked about, rat poison is persistent in the environment. So anything that eats rat poison, if something eats that animal, they're going to get poisoned. So, we just say across the board, don't use rat poison. It's really terrible for wildlife, not just raptors, but any other animals that might scavenge those carcasses. When we get an animal in with rat poison, really, we're looking at supportive care for them, fluids. We can do some things to help when it's an anticoagulant poison, but that's a really, really tough prognosis for us. So, we hate to see that, and we try and educate people on alternative methods to use that don't involve poison. Lead poisoning is a little bit of a better prognosis, although of course we don't want these animals to be running into any of these things. Lead and rodent poison are completely human caused. There's no way that they would come into contact with any of these things in a totally wild environment. So, but lead poisoning luckily is a lot more treatable. Again, it sticks around in the environment. So if a raptor eats something that has lead in it, that raptor will ingest that lead and be susceptible to lead poisoning. They can also, hopefully not in our area because gun hunting is not legal in Philadelphia, but if they eat lead shot, either from scavenging a carcass or if they are unfortunately and illegally shot with lead shot, they can also get lead poisoning that way. So there are a couple of different routes, unfortunately, for them to pick up lead poisoning. Like I said, we don't see lead shot as a big problem in our area as much as other clinics might in areas where there's more hunting. We're mostly seeing it because they're ingesting it from the environment. Pigeons actually come in with lead poisoning a lot just from picking it up off the ground. So, them being a big food source for raptors, they tend to pick that up. So anytime a raptor comes in with these non-specific neurological symptoms that don't resolve with treatment for head trauma, we look at lead poisoning as a possibility. And we actually are very lucky to have an in-house lead test machine, so we can run that test super quick. It helps us target our treatment protocol. So we can either rule out lead poisoning and start looking at other less common causes, or we know that it's lead poisoning and we start treating for it. And our red-tailed hawk, he actually came in with lead poisoning. So we'll take a look here. I've actually got a nice slow-mo video of him. So this guy came in from a suspected impact injury, but nobody saw what happened, so we're not 100% sure. But we do know he definitely had lead poisoning. The head trauma resolved within 48 hours, but he was still off balance, a little dull, wasn't responding as he should. So we treated him for lead poisoning with chelation therapy. So there's a medication that basically binds to the lead and draws it out of the system, which is really helpful for us that we can give a medication for that. He needed fluids and gavage feeding, which is you put a tube directly down into the crop and feed them a liquid diet. He needed that for several days. And then slowly, as the lead came out of his system, he got feistier and feistier, and angrier at us. And so we knew the treatment was working. And sure enough, after a couple of weeks of treatment, the lead was gone from his system and we moved him outside. And it took him a long time to recover from that. As I said, he came in mid-December and he was really only cleared for release maybe a couple of weeks ago. But you can see in this video that he is feeling a lot better. So, and this is a juvenile, like I said, so take a look and see if you can see that brown banded tail instead of the red. So this guy, when we first put him out in this outdoor enclosure, he had a hard time getting from the ground to a high up perch because he was so out of shape. And now he's able to perform these acrobatic maneuvers and then buzz very, very close to me, probably indicating that he doesn't want to be bothered. So I'll go ahead and play that one more time just so you can take a look. Just really like taking these slow-mo videos. It's great to really see them move. And also, again, diagnostic for us, because with the slow-mo, you know, we can take a really good look and see, is he flying appropriately? You know, even if they can make the jump from one perch to another, we want to make sure that they can make it over a much longer flight period. So he's ready for release, but obviously we got pounded with snow, so he's not going anywhere anytime soon. We don't want to release him into a blizzard. That just wouldn't be fair. We want to give these guys the best possible chance from the moment they arrive with us until the moment they jump out of the box and back out into the wild blue yonder. So our other patient that I mentioned is the sharp-shinned hawk that I had the photo of a little bit earlier. He came in about the same time. He's an adult. So with Sharpies and Cooper's hawks, sometimes they will just have head trauma from a window strike and there's nothing else going on, because what they do is they chase these small songbirds and they hit the window when the songbird swerves out of the way. So this guy, we're pretty sure that was what happened with him. The finder had actually seen him impact their window, and he tested negative for lead, but he did have a coracoid fracture, which is pretty common with small birds that hit windows. The coracoid is a strut-like bone that makes up part of the shoulder girdle in birds, and it's really strong, but it also tends to get knocked out of place pretty easily. So this guy had a wing droop, so we knew something was going on there. He couldn't fly correctly. So he just needed cage rest. With the coracoid, because it's deep in the breast muscle, there's no way to splint it. We just basically have to confine them for at least a couple of weeks. So same thing, he was inside for 2 weeks. He really did not enjoy our continual bothering of him to medicate him. But we did make sure that he was on pain control and gave him calcium to help that injury heal. And within a couple of weeks, he was ready to go outside into one of our outdoor enclosures, built up his strength. And then this is a release video from Liz Ellman, our Assistant Director of Rehabilitation. And you can see how well he flies. Right at the person opening the box and then makes that quick turn. So this is a very blink and you'll miss it video, but we'll go ahead and play that again. So he's just excited to be out of there. And then he's gone, which is exactly what we want to see. This is the perfect release. They come out of the box, they fly away, and we never see them again. We definitely don't want to see them again. We don't want them getting into whatever trouble landed them at the clinic in the first place. So those are our urban champion raptor species. That's just a handful of the dozens of species that live in this area, but nobody wants to hear me talk for 6 hours about these things. So I definitely encourage you to check out Audubon's website for our native raptors. Go bird watching. Come to the Schuylkill Center and walk around and look for them. We have a really, really great environment for a lot of raptor species. So they'll be hanging around and might be a little bit easier to spot with the trees bare. And it's a year-round thing. You'll see different species throughout the year. Like I mentioned, the sharp-shinned hawk only here in the winter. So go out and find them before they leave. Yeah, definitely see what you can see out there. We actually have a couple that hang around the clinic. We had a juvenile Cooper's hawk in the fall who kept looking at the pigeon enclosures we have and wondering why the pigeons were hanging out in that metal box and not coming out so that he could eat them. And he really tried. He hung around for a couple of weeks, and I'm sure the pigeons didn't enjoy that. But of course, he couldn't get to them. They were quite well secured. Eventually, he gave up and flew off, thankfully. But it was kind of neat to come out and see him just perching in a tree, trying to puzzle it out, how he could get past that door and into the pigeons. So we've talked about the wintering raptors that live around here, but soon enough we're going to see the start of breeding season and spring baby season, which is going to be crazy for us. Great horned owls actually breed really, really early, so they're already nesting, but thankfully they're great parents and we don't see a lot of their babies at the clinic. Most other raptors are going to start around March and May, and we always get a handful of displaced raptors every year at least, and a ton of squirrels, possums, rabbits, baby birds, just all the other babies throughout the year. And right now we're gearing up for spring baby season, and one piece of equipment that we really need are animal specific incubators. So we're trying to raise some donations to purchase a couple more animal specific incubators. Right now we use human incubators, which are less ideal. They work okay, but they're not great for the humidity level, and the size and shape of them is just really not ideal for our space. So we're hoping to get a couple more. We have 2 animal incubators right now that we use for critical cases, but it would be really helpful to us to have a couple more to deal with babies, raptors, as well as all the avalanche of other babies that we're gonna receive. So your donation to the Wildlife Clinic would help us purchase incubators, along with the many supplies that we use in our upcoming baby season, which is right around the corner. It's the beginning of February, and I'm already thinking about what's going to happen in another month or 2. So it'll be exciting. I'm sure that we'll have lots and lots of babies to occupy us pretty soon here. So thank you so much for joining us tonight and listening to me talk about some of my favorite animals here. And I really hope that you'll go out and do some bird watching and try and observe some of the animals some of the raptors that we talked about tonight.
Chris, I'd like to keep you talking for a few minutes more. We got a bunch of comments and questions in chat. So, and you got some applause reactions too. So thank you. So people, if you want to hang on for a few minutes, we'll get to some of the questions. It's not yet 8, but I'm so glad you're all here. Are Sharpies, sharp shins, we call them Sharpies, right? As aggressive with people as Coopers are? Is one of the first question from Shan Lee.
Yep, so they are. So not to get too technical with the scientific names and all that, but sharpshins and Coopers are accipiter hawks, which tend to be those bird-eating hawks. They're a lot more high-strung, whereas red tails are a different group. They're buteo hawks, and they tend to be, they're still easily stressed, but, a little bit more low-key. So Sharpies, Sharpshins, and Coopers have very similar behavior when we see them in a captive setting.
Great. How many pigeons can a peregrine eat in one day? Is there an upper limit, or is it an all-you-can-eat buffet? Asked Jennifer.
It depends on whether they're nesting. I honestly don't know how many they would take in a day to feed their nestlings, but more than one. Raptors sometimes don't eat every day. If they have a really good meal, they might actually go 48 hours before hunting again. But when they're nesting and they're raising babies, especially if they have a large clutch, they'll just keep going after them. But luckily pigeons breed fast, so they keep up with each other for sure.
Sandy saw her first bald eagle at the Shelley Center, which is a valley over, 2 years ago. Lori noticed that there's a nesting pair at a Montgomery County high school. That's been there for a lot of years. Robert wanted to know which high school. So Lori, I'm not sure you answered in the chat, but feel free, or unless you want to protect the identity. I actually saw an eagle last year eating a goldfish. That happens at you when you have your goldfish pond. You get great blue herons too. A bald eagle flew by my dad's office window, 24th. Wow, floor in the Rittenhouse Park area. That's great.
You all need to send me your good eagle luck so I can spot them.
Yeah. In general, how long do raptors routinely go without eating? I know it's often hard to find food, and many don't survive their first year, but is it normal for them to go without eating for a day or two?
They can. if it's an adult and they recently had a really good meal, they can wait a little while between hunts. Juveniles sometimes will go several days without eating, but the longer they go, the harder it is to then find food. And that's actually how some of them will end up with us, not for any particular human caused reason, but just because they can't find enough food and they come in really weak and thin. And then our only job is to get them fed up, which is, a little bit more straightforward. So we're not glad to get any animals, but we're glad to get those easier cases where it's just a case of they didn't have any luck hunting and they just need a little boost.
Good. A bunch of comments. People enjoy the lecture, so thank you for those comments. Alyssa, are the local efforts to reduce bird window strikes in the region, especially during migration season? Actually, I can begin to answer and then I'll turn to you, but the Schuylkill Center in our last newsletter had a pull-out poster, which you can probably get if you talk to the front desk. But it's 20 wonderful ways you can help nature, and one of the 20 ways was to put up window strikes, and we sell them in the gift shop. Sell them at the clinic too. So we do have those window strike decals, so the bird sees something and it's not just reflecting sky. But Chris, go ahead, your thoughts.
Yeah, as far as, in your own home, it's really easy to prevent window strikes. You just need to put up decals. There are a number of options. We do sell them. So I definitely encourage you to look into that, just to prevent that from happening in your own backyard. As far as large buildings downtown, that's a lot trickier. Some places will retrofit their windows to make them bird safe, but obviously that's expensive and it can be a hard sell. I do know this migration season, it sounds like the Comcast building is going to be trying to keep its lights off at night, which is hugely helpful. So it's just kind of a slow effort to get more places to realize there are ways to stop these collisions.
Yep. And Audubon's working really hard on this issue. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Chris, long question about how people can volunteer. You want to mention that?
We are taking volunteer applications right now, but because of COVID, we haven't been able to have the full volunteer program that we would have in a normal year. We are working on a couple of new ways for volunteers to come in and help us out while being safe with COVID. And then, of course, as soon as we're able to open back up to our full volunteer program, we will be doing that as soon as we feel that it's safe for staff and volunteers.
Yeah. Once we're through this, we need like 100 volunteers to make the clinic work.
We will be training a lot of volunteers once we're able to do that.
Yeah.
But right now you can go to our website, go to the clinic tab on the Schuylkill Center website, and there's a link to plug in your information for volunteering, and we'll reach out as soon as we have training days for volunteer opportunities.
And for everybody, I know it's almost 8 o'clock or just about is. We'll keep reading a few questions, so feel free to leave as you would like or stick around and hear Chris answer more questions. Feel free to keep asking. So I know there's a bunch of questions coming up, but as you sign off, do check out next week, Naughty by Nature, the Valentine's Day special, and then in 2 weeks, the Dick James lecture about the Mudif, the reed grass house. Okay. How about pigeons ingesting lead paint and then the raptor eating the pigeon? Does that happen?
Yeah, pigeons pick up lead because they forage on the ground and they're in urban environments. So if there's lead contamination in a city, the pigeons will be contaminated with lead. There have actually been studies that track high lead contamination in pigeons with high lead contamination spots in cities. So they're a pretty good indicator. And if a raptor eats those pigeons, then yeah, especially if they're eating them over time and ingesting more and more of that lead, that can really impact them, unfortunately.
If raptors nest in the city, what do they build their nests out of? Do they have to go far away to collect materials?
Probably not, because we have so much, in Philly anyway, we have so much green space, which is really, really awesome for them. They probably don't have to go too far to find nesting materials. And some, like peregrines, nest on pretty bare ledges, so they don't, eagles, as we saw in that one photo, build these really elaborate stick nests that can be huge, many, many feet across. But some just nest basically on a window ledge. But either way, they don't have too much trouble finding nesting material.
Do you need to take them somewhere to release them, or you just open the enclosure?
We do take them off site to release, and it really depends on the specific case. Generally, if it's an adult raptor, we release it where it was found, unless there is something really seriously dangerous that we can't do that. But generally, we're going to take them as close to where they were found as possible. With juveniles, sometimes, especially if they were found in a really not ideal location, we'll find something that's close by that's a good habitat for them, because they would be dispersing anyway, so they don't have a territory. But with an adult animal, if you release them far away from their territory, they're just going to try and get back and be in danger the whole way back and not know where they, how to find food where you've put them. So, we have to consider what they're, not just what we think is a perfect habitat for them, but where they actually live. And when it comes to urban raptors, sometimes that means taking them somewhere that we might not think of. We're not taking them out into the woods. We're returning them to a park that's right by where they were found, so they can continue to be, urban success stories.
How long do raptors generally live? And can you estimate their age when they come into you?
Depends on the species. I know sharpshins in the wild only live 2 to 3 years on average. Peregrines can live up to 11 to 15, maybe more. I'm not 100% sure off the top of my head, but they can live a while in the wild for the larger species. We can't really estimate their age beyond knowing whether they're a first-year bird. Sometimes if there's a color change in that species over several years, like with gulls, actually, they'll change color over a period of years, so we can tell this is a first, a second, or a third-year bird. But generally, it's just this is a juvenile versus this is an adult.
Great. Lots of thanks. People saying they love being members of the Schuylkill Center. Thank you. People saying they're going to donate to the campaign. And the question comes up, what does the animal incubator cost?
The ones that we are looking at run about $800. So it's not a small investment for us. But they have humidity gauges and internal lights, because sunlight is really important for the development of young animals. So if we can get basically solar lights in there, that's even better for them. So we're looking at something that'll give them a little bit of an edge when they're being raised in captivity.
So you can also stop sharing your screen now, so we can just see you then. And just a few more. We got a few more. Let's see. We have somebody who came and wanted to know, is this being recorded? And the answer is yes. So it's being recorded, and we should make that available pretty easily. Actually, we also have a YouTube channel. There's a Schuylkill Center YouTube channel where these tend to go afterwards too. So they'll be recorded. We have somebody who is now in 3rd grade, but went to nature preschool. We have a graduate, an alumnus. Thank you so much. So yes, it's being recorded. Let's get to some more questions. There we are. Lots of thanks. Where would sharp shins be found year round?
They tend to like, oh, sorry, was there more?
Oh, it doesn't understand why they would be found now as opposed to another time.
So when they're in the breeding season, they tend to want to live in really dense wooded cover, far, far away from people. So they do nest in Pennsylvania, but it tends to be, in pretty big stretches of woodland where they can be isolated. And then in the wintertime, when they're dispersing, there are a lot of young hawks that are looking for territory of their own, and so they pass through the area. Or there are adults that are just dispersing because food becomes a little bit harder to find in that dense wooded cover that they prefer during the breeding season. So they'll come out, and with urban spaces, we have sparrows and starlings, as well as other native songbirds that are really ubiquitous year round. So the food source definitely draws them to areas that they wouldn't necessarily be the rest of the year.
Mm-hmm. What kind of supplies can people donate? They'd like to know. And also, do we have a wish list like on Amazon or on our website? We sometimes have a wish list on our website.
We do, yes. We have an Amazon wish list and an in-kind donation wish list on the website that we update regularly with materials that we need. So a lot of it is food items. gloves are always appreciated, especially now. They're a little bit harder to find. Various cleaning supplies, but all of that is, the whole list is on the website.
Great. If a raptor happens to get rat poison, DIC like dogs do, I don't know what DIC means. Do you?
I'm not sure. That acronym might just be escaping me at the moment.
Okay.
But I mean, I can tell you what we do for them, which is just basically anticoagulant. Most rat poisons are an anticoagulant poison. So we give vitamin supplements that help with coagulation and also new blood cell formation. And then fluids, lots and lots of fluids. So it's just basically really intense supportive care for them until the poison passes out of their system.
Ashley's great. She's ahead of me. She just put up the wish list link. So thank you, Ashley.
Thank you.
That's great. Okay. And DIC is disseminated intravascular coagulation. People are on their Google for us. Appreciate it.
So we don't currently have the capacity to do that at the clinic, but we do work with clinics like Tri-State, Bird Rescue, who I know can perform procedures like that. So sometimes we do, if we have a really intense case and we're able to get it over to them with, you know, things like rat poison, we do have the ability to do that.
Great. Chris, on behalf of all of us, I want to thank you so much for the presentation, for taking the time to put this together for all of us. Really appreciate it. I know that you guys are busy over there, and for you to do this, it's really wonderful. So thank you on behalf of everybody here tonight. People, everybody, every Thursday night, 7 o'clock, we got something good going on like this. So I mentioned the next two in 3 weeks on the 25th, the last Thursday of February. We're talking about beavers in the city of Philadelphia. Beavers have come back. They were not here 100 years ago. And they're actually in Roxborough at Flat Rock Dam. So learn about the wonderful story of beavers coming back to the city of Philadelphia. They're here in multiple places, not just in Roxborough, but also in Roxborough. So a lot going on Thursdays, and do come for a walk anytime. It's just a wonderful time to see things like coyote tracks. So thank you, everybody. And again, Chris, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming, everybody.
All right. Good night, folks. Thank you.